Yes, Nishant, well, yes. Hello.
Yeah.
We're live. We can start.
Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We continue with the research dissertation symposium. The last panel has already set an interesting base for this one. So we have three presenters in this panel today. We have Abhilasha Patil, Spatiality in the Age of Social Media. Ronak Soni, who will speak on when is digital in space. And Vikram Veeravalli with his stories of digital domesticities. The respondents for this panel are Vishwanath Kashikar and Zarovar Zaidi. Vishwanath is a tenured associate professor who is intrigued by the relationship between clarity and creativity. Over the past 13 years as a full-time faculty member at the Faculty of Architecture in SEB, he's having taught most courses at the undergraduate program. Now he conducts teachers training programs, workshops, and curriculum revisions workshops across the country. He's particularly keen on studying the gap between teaching and learning. He's also interested in the question of urban housing. His research focuses on studying the spatiality of apartment buildings in India through courses on housing design in India and international workshops. He attempts to explore the limits of architecture design in housing. Welcome, Vishwanath, again on this panel. And we have Zarovar. Zarovar is a philosopher and a social anthropologist. She works at the intersections of critical theory, anthropology, art, architecture, and material culture studies. She has extensively worked on religious architecture and urbanism in the city of Bombay, and currently co-runs a site on writing the city called Chirag Dilli. Previously has worked also on rural development with a focus on health, education, and women's rights across India, and currently works on religious iconography in modern architecture in Southeast Asia. She has received the Max Planck Fellowship, INTAC Fellowship, IFA Fellowship, and many more. Besides this, she is also curated an interdisciplinary forum on art, architecture, and anthropology. Elementary forms has been previously taught in School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi. She currently teaches at the Jindal School of Architecture in Sonipat, India. So I request Abhilasha to go ahead and start the panel.
Yeah, I'll start with my video. You can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
I'll start.
Hi, this is Abhilasha Patil and I'm looking at spatiality in the age of social media. We all are aware of how social media creates a platform for constant circulation of images. These images have the power to mask, erase or filter the unwanted, which makes them look perfect and can thus generate an image of aspiration. These aspirations then later take form of trends. These trends are then largely followed by people, which results in producing similar spaces. My concern arose while observing a shift towards certain kind of lifestyle, which also leads to creating trends in architectural practice. Spaces are getting reduced to perfect backgrounds for us to click pictures in. People now need spaces for a perfect Zoom call background or background for their Instagrammable images. Through my research, I am looking at the question of how these trends on social media influence the current practice of space making amongst architects. While trying to understand the relationship between social media and spatiality, I am trying to identify the shifts that occurred, if any, because of the introduction of this new medium. I started by looking at a comparative analysis of practices that extensively use social media, moderately use social media, and practices that are not on social media. The intention here is to identify how spaces are getting built in the minds of people through images. Here, each project is drawn through the lens of images that the practice has published online on their respective social media platforms. I am trying to build up an understanding of the space by using the method of collage and by drawing important elements of the image and keeping the materiality visible. Anantam is a project in Dehradun by Studio K. After combining all the images, we can understand that having a great view while being protected inside the build form is the kind of aspiration that the images are trying to generate in the minds of people. hill. Each space is crafted in a way that it has a view towards the hills. The plan suggests larger opening on the outer edges and solid walls towards the inside of the built form. Local materials are also used in this context. Renders also give an understanding of specific type of frames that can be used to click pictures in this space. The post from a trending hashtag #FollowMeProject, is also used in one of the renders. Panorama house. As the name suggests, this house is designed by keeping in mind the view that is getting framed. This is a project by A4 Architecture in Nashik. The framing is similar to the frames that we select while taking a panorama shot. A website describes the design consideration based on a childhood dream of watching the sunrise from the middle of the two mountains, and the spaces get crafted to frame the same view. Every space inside the house is configured in a way that the user gets a view of the river and the mountains. The transparent glass facade also helps to frame a view from every space. The slender columns create minimum interruption in the view that is getting framed. While building this comparative analysis of three categories of practices, I realized that the spaces that are getting built through practices that extensively and moderately use social media are catering to certain aspirations through their designs. These spaces also become photogenic as they are crafted by using color palettes and materials that makes them frame interesting spaces for the viewers. To understand further the question of how trends on social media affect the spatial configuration, I'm trying to build another side study to shape my argument. Here I realized that in order to understand what kind of trends social media creates, I should look at accounts and practices that are influential on social media. The rendering firms, the social media influencers, play an important role for making me understand the current trends. These practices are selected by keeping in mind the parameter of having more than 10k followers, so that whatever they post on social media is at least visible to 10,000 screens. After identifying the three practices, I'm looking at projects from each practice and trying to identify the elements that become important for circulation of images. I'm comparing it with the images spaces shared online from different contexts and mostly from social media influencers that look similar, and trying to identify the norms and standards that social media is creating in the practice of space making. This is an image of the two-bay house by Mesa Architect. As we click inside the image, we can see the projects from social media that follow a similar spatial configuration, with the large garden, transparent walls, and spaces that frame a view towards the sunset. With one more click, we can see images posted by travel bloggers of enjoying the sunset. Then I have tried delayering the spatial configurations that become important for a space to be Instagrammable. This drawing is like screenshots from social media, which are arranged by keeping in mind the swipe right to see more feature of Instagram and scroll down to see more like this feature from Pinterest. Here, the built form sits right in the middle of a large landscape. The large garden becomes an important framing device to frame the built form and the user posing with a green background. As we scroll up, we can see projects from different contexts doing the same thing, and as we scroll down, we can observe people posting with green backgrounds or using the garden to frame the house behind. As we swipe right to view more, we can see the house has glass walls on both the sides to frame a view to the nature from inside. As we scroll up, we can see two projects doing the exact same, and as we scroll down, we can see travel bloggers framing themselves with a view. Here the living room has a view towards the landscape and the swimming pool. The projects on the top also have a similar spatial configuration, and the images at the bottom show people clicking pictures with a swimming pool with landscape and the living room with a view. As we swipe right, we can see the positioning of the swimming pool becoming important as the bedroom gets a clear view of the swimming pool as one gets up. The images above also show projects following the same positioning of the swimming pool, and the bottom images are also from bloggers that show bedrooms with a view as soon as you get up. The 180-degree house is located on a contour with each space framing a view towards the river and the hills. Even in this, the entrance staircase becomes an element. The living room has a large opening to frame the view towards the hills and the river. As it is crafted on a contour, each space has a view to the landscape. A bedroom that frames a view of the river from the bed. A play of shadow can be observed with the steel panels in the living room. Residence for Mr. Suryavanshi. This is a house in Nashik designed by Environ planners. It is an older firm as compared to the above examples and not currently on social media. Here, as we look closely, we can observe how the indoors and the outdoors flow into each other, creating more interactive spaces. It has open to sky codes to provide good amount of natural light and ventilation. The spaces created gives more emphasis on the experiential aspect of the space rather than just being photogenic. These spaces have many interruptions in the frames that they are composing. Now, after comparing the images of each practice with images from architectural photographers and other social media bloggers, we can understand how aspirations are being shaped through social media. This results in creating norms and standards that take form of trends in this practice of space making. We can see how specific building elements and their positioning remains common throughout each project. The water body comes around the puja room and the swimming pool is placed right in front of the living room or the bedroom. The indoor gardens are placed on the ground floor with a skylight on top that helps in creating a vertical void which becomes a small courtyard to allow sunlight entering into the house with staircase running around it. The wide and long staircase are being used to create grand entrance with a neutral background with horizontal lines to frame an object. With the trend of posting with a great sunset view, we can see elements that let the user click those images. Here, the context plays an important role for the framing elements to operate. The 180-degree house frames a view of the hills and the river by having long balconies and larger openings in every space. The two-bay house has transparent walls on both sides to frame the build form to capture larger view of the landscape. Various elements are being used as framing devices to either frame the outside space or frame the built form through the outdoor spaces. In a few cases, we can observe how the built form is being framed through the large crafted landscape, whereas in some other cases, we can see the natural or crafted landscape being framed through the inside house. With each new trend, there are certain norms and standards that get generated. For example, if a person wants to click a video while getting up from a bed on a holiday, he or she is quickly reminded of the trend where the video needs to frame the ceiling first and then slowly transition by shifting the frame to a great view from the bed. Also, while building the comparison, we can understand how some materials are paired together in different ways as if it is a norm to use some amount of green whenever an exposed concrete wall is used. These spatial configurations help us in understanding how the relationship of social media and spatiality is built through the changing trends. Thank you.
Thanks, Abhilasha. I would request Ronak to go ahead.
Yes, I'll present the screen. Then
the research becomes a dialogue between our ways of thinking and imagining space and the digital which has entered our ways of living. A code can be simply understood as a system of signals or symbols used for communication. How does this logic of code translate to architecture? Robert Evans in his essay writes, "Architects do not make buildings, they make drawings of a building." Taking this further, it makes architecture a notional practice, and drawing becomes a type of visual code that contains information about the built form, which is interpreted to translate it to a physical form. The thesis focuses on questions of how mechanisms of the digital realm shape the nature, sense, practice, and physicality of space through spline, virtual simulation, subsurface division, big data, and AI, which is clubbed with machine learning. I would like to set up the term digital here. I argue that the idea of the digital is a method of thinking through numbers, almost as an additional sense, rather than it related to computers, technology, or the internet. It becomes the initial catalyst of curiosity and inquiries of the everyday and the self. To understand the analog approach of architecture, I start with Domino House, designed by Le Corbusier. It was a diagrammatic design for the domestic sphere and the city at large. He developed the structural skeleton composed of horizontal slabs and pilotis, leaving the rest to an ad hoc. This reduction of architectural form to structure is crucial here, which can be observed as a response to the economic process over a design decision. It also sets an example for using the new materials offered by the Industrial Revolution, that is, reinforced concrete. This need to translate exact information for construction, calculation, and approval reduces thinking of space to shape, size, and two-dimensional drawings which are precisely annotated. Orthographic drafting further evolves to standardization in terms of production and concept both, where a bedroom can be distinguished from a corridor solely because of its proportions. I extend the means of measuring space to Villa Savoy. The design was set in 5 principles devised by Corbusier himself. It had a clear emphasis on the lateral position of the ramp and the staircases which mark the circulation in relation to the slab whose form is not perceived by any other vertical element rather than the minimal footing of the column. Here, the only curvature that we see are either perfect circles or semicircles, almost generated as a response to the turning radius of a car. The horizontal datum of the house is expressed through the ribbon windows in the edge of the slab. These moves are not motivated by any functional or structural necessity, and it produced an intentional type that identifies as the locus of architecture. This method of thinking about space in orthography with drafting tools can be opened in 4 separate ways. It makes the space into elements which sit together. Each element demands space. While defining them in orthography, it almost adds a separate space. The architect gets the final control and authority in decision making. And lastly, it makes space measurable in 2 dimensions. It took some time until architects and academics began to explore the possibilities of new digital tools to create different approaches to design. Computational design challenged 3 specific areas here. These softwares are based on topological description of surface rather than the Cartesian way of defining coordinates in x, y, and z. The method of drawing are based on parameters. This makes drawing an equation-based process. It provides a virtual space that allows temporal dimension while designing. The dynamic form of the embryological house comprises fluid vector-based surfaces now referred to as blobs. It rethinks the notion of a manufactured home, moving from the modernist idea of a form based on module to a form based on potentially unlimited iterations derived from a basic unit or a primitive. The goal was to design and manufacture houses that exhibit variety based on a shared regulating principle, a mass customization. By experimenting with a series of 12 curve points attached to a spline, mass customization directly questioned the concepts of standards. Form developed by force makes the site and context an integral part of design. Topological descriptions of spline challenged orthography as a norm. Formally developed space dissolved the rigid integration and segregations which was defined in orthographic planning. Computers were also shifting the way we interact with our built form. Particle simulation and path-based animation increased our capacity to engage with space. I further elaborate this through Freshwater Pavilion. Here, the spatiality becomes a landscape of successive transformations, a topology of emergence which is actively defined by lines of force and occurs as an alive territory rather than a limited space of predefined boundaries. On the other hand, the penetration of more sophisticated devices of ubiquitous computing further influenced the generation of these new spatialities, which depend more on complex in-sync experience, generating a multimodal interaction. This allows the space to perform endless possibilities of events while maintaining a dynamic correlation between the virtual and the actual based on aggregation of architecture and information. Thus, simulation, along with surrounding forces that shape the form of the structure, adds a layer of sensorium. This merges the idea of boundary with space as a continuum with the surrounding. It thrives to engage with the user as a whole beyond the 5 measurable senses or just the physical body. The space inhabited connects to the environment, site, and forces of nature, making it the part and the whole. A new generation of subsurface modeling challenged the previous drawing methods of defining architecture with small data equations of spline. The model in the video is generating a unique shape at the origin for every frame. These shapes can be extracted out, used as the whole, or building blocks that form the whole. Space was defined with point clouds with unique origins. This eliminates the streamlined wireframe nature of the space from the previous era. It started utilizing the processing power which fundamentally changed the meaning of freeform. I used a short clip from Michael Hansmeyer and Benjamin Dellenberg's Digital Grotesque. A kit bashing had emerged here. Computational design defined procedures to generate form. Shifting the design process onto this coded abstraction had a dramatic impact at the level of design. A single process can create entire families of form which can be tweaked further over generations. At the level of resolution, form designed by algorithms enable a complexity and richness that would be nearly impossible to draw by hand and would be equally tedious to draw in a 3D CAD software. In this example, the script is governing the computer based on the model of a cellular automata. It utilizes a long cuboidal pipe and the same set of 5 operations, stretch, bend, mirror, solidify and tilt, are performed on it with variations, the space produced as a result of that. This excessive resolution is an offshoot of big data. It's a visual that portrays the excessive of computing power that in some sense is not comprehensive with our minds. Industrial revolution and gadgets extended our physical bodies. Now digital cultural technology is extending our natural intelligence in an augmented manner. These logics and striving to understand and know may be one of the trigger points for the development of artificial intelligence. A logic gate has no sense of design. It repeats the same operation with small variables until it reaches the desired result. This allows the computer a different way of thinking, which also makes it able to mimic nature. In epistemological terms, the new science of generation is a little more than the marginal quantitative upgrade in conceptual tools. Here, the drive is to look at automating the information generation, collection, and processing, almost hinting at developing a type of intuition. Combining the argument ahead, how does it affect space? In different ways, today's digital avant-garde started using big data and computation to engage with the raw form of nature. The messy point cloud and volumetric units of design and calculation emerging from this showcase a fragmented and disjointed style. This discreteness is now embedded in most of the new age softwares for structural design as well. The grotesque contains around 30 billion voxels and 260 million surfaces. This separates what does it mean for a building to be ornamented, decorated, or the form itself. Since the early 1990s, designers have engaged with the digital, and many key principles have been interpreted, developed, and popularized by architects and designers. That leaves a visible trace that reflects directly in the design thinking and execution. Digital has entered as a method and in the act of drawing and construction that started changing the nature of architecture and eventually shaping life. Orthography used this as compression that resulted in definitives and standards. Introduction of spline introduced previously unimaginable blobs and made drawing parameter and equation based digital process. This allowed for variation and continuous flows of forces. Subsurface division pushed this thinking beyond the equations. The big data culture of today allows for even higher resolution with lesser restrictions, showing the fragmentation in nature evolving as discrete. With automata and even more precise experiments are blurring the boundary between space, environment, and the self, making a large continuum. These various characteristics were offered by the digital thinking, many by default, which slowly developed as the following design models. Desettling space, one by one. One can trace how digital started negotiating with the concepts of form, standards, privacy, nature, sense, practice, and physicality. We now see space generated from physical to physical relation in Domino House and Villa Savoy, digital to physical in Embryological House, Freshwater Pavilion, Digital Grotesque. With the last example, it pushes the study to ask what will be a digital type of space, almost challenging the title of the thesis to move ahead, asking when is digital space?
Thanks, Ronak. Vikram?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. One second. Speed, Ronak, the speed of your presentation was like some other, like a video game.
So I'll begin with my presentation with the research question.
What are the implications of the digital in the sense of space? This video poses a few arguments of how space and its perception get shifted with the mixing of the digital with the everyday. My concern arises from an introspection of my life over the last year. With working online from home, sharing screens, looking at multiple devices, etc. simultaneously, the engagement with the digital has increased drastically, but it has also reached the extent of seeming banal. My house gets configured in many ways. As a start, I identify clearly observable factors of the digital and the non-digital. Where does the separation occur? The digital filters the sensory experience. What I feel while walking, what I smell, hear, or see creates an ambient environment that is filtered by a photo or a video recording. I take the kitchen as a direct example of how the digital has rendered such a space obsolete today. The kitchen is historically seen as a space to make food, sometimes as a communal activity, as a place for gossip, and is associated with the recipes passed on generations. Today, my family orders food sometimes through catering services, through restaurants across the city. A social network is created across space beyond the volume of the kitchen. Over the past year, groceries and essentials have been ordered online and the kitchen used as a storage area. My mom organizes her work calls and meetings from the kitchen at times. We also experiment with recipes from across many contexts, with softwares and algorithms providing simultaneous guidance, and also post them on social media. In similar ways, much of the household gets configured by a mix of the digital and practices, cycles, or routines. A large part of this is through codes, algorithms, and softwares of the devices we use. For example, a tool like Google Lens uses a photograph to create a set of responses from across networks online. The result breaks down notions of time by pausing and holding a moment across different spaces. Our body works through similar means of receptors and processing of stimuli through emotions and memory. What separates us from the digital is the sense of periphery and multiple focuses. The digital lacks periphery and hence builds an environment through the restrictive frame and components, but it becomes a bodily auxiliary, an extension of the body with a different sense of touch. Another capability of the digital is to warp space and time. I can scan myself and create multiple versions of me and the space that I inhabit to be morphed. I also look at the concepts of permanence versus the change in layouts of space. My house, built as a 3 BHK types, is transformed by use associated to the digital. One of my bedrooms is converted into a space for music production. The structure of the room is relatively permanent, but the dynamic use constantly changes it. The hall where my dad and I take turns working in changes from a living area to a space of privacy. The devices I use, objects I touch, photos and videos, exist across multiple spaces and time simultaneously. The kitchen, as mentioned before, becomes obsolete. The bedroom becomes a new living area or a common area for family to gather, work, or relax.
This diagram shows the spaces that are digitally activated in the house. One of the main reconfigurations happen through the blurring and smudging of spaces that have been newly configured or appropriated in many more ways than their intended purposes as per the type.
I look at the cases of 3 other such households that get morphed or transformed by the digital, each talking about different levels of integration with the digital. Ashwath's family lives in a newly rebuilt house in T Nagar, Chennai. An extended family of 15 people are distributed into separate flats in the same building. At his place, the TV in the central room is on and runs all morning, most days, with Tamil movies and serials that his mother watches. On weekends, the family of 3 gathers in the hall to watch movies or shows. Adjacent to this is Achu's room with an elaborate gaming setup with 2 screens, 2 keyboards, and other devices. He spends most hours a day playing games online with friends or with other family members in the house through the devices. In the other bedroom, his parents have a smaller TV setup that only runs cable networks. The kitchen faces the corridor, allowing his mother to keep a watchful eye on visitors. When she cooks, she listens to music playing on the TV in the central room. The sounds from the TV on all the houses echo across the corridor to signal the rest about certain shows or movies that they all watch together. Adjacent to this house is Venkatesh's family. One sees and hears the TV from the corridor as one enters the house. The TV is placed on the central wall so that it's seen from the bedroom or the kitchen. In one of the bedrooms, there's another small TV mounted high on the wall for listening to music. The kitchen is on the corner and is connected to the central room and echoes with the sounds from the TV in the hall or from different calls. The other room on the opposite side of the house is where he works on his laptop for most days and occasionally plays games with the rest of the family in the building. All the houses are interconnected through sounds or networks of films, music, or games that they engage in. The corridor is activated in the evenings as a gathering place for gossip or mobile gaming, or both. On the first floor, below Venkatesh's house, is Sushupta and Satvika's family. A family of 5, their parents and grandmother pass time by watching films and reality shows. The family gathers mostly for lunch or dinner. On one side in the bedroom, Satvika works on a laptop for college and edits her dance videos. On the other side, in the parents' bedroom, Sushupta spends a day answering work calls from a tech company. Each member takes a different room in order to work in a quiet environment. They split for work, but then connect with the rest of the house through the digital. The kitchen becomes an annex to the hall. The ground floor, which used to be a common area in the older building, is now a parking area with a small office on the corner for developers. The transformation in the household has forced new ways of connection within the family through subtle digital means while segregating the spaces into more personal pockets. This diagram shows the house as a network of intensity of devices. We have seen that there is a breakage of roles and activities within the family. The map delayers the mix to the digital intervention and shows the shift from a family of low intensity digital involvement to one that is more cellularized and individual.
This diagram combines these concepts to identify the digitally activated spaces and the connections between the actors. The direct connections are those of the immediate family members. The dotted lines indicate online connections or indirect relations through digital technologies.
The next story is an account of my nephews in a house in T Nagar as well. The narrative is focusing on the effects of COVID-19 pandemic causing a shift in the household configuration through the digital. Arhan and Madhavan are 4 and 7 years old respectively. Their days are spent jumping around the house, constantly involved in different activities like online schooling, watching nursery rhymes, exploring the phone through random clicks and swipes, etc. Since the outside of the house is cut off from the inside physically, there is an emergence of new activities. Their parents develop new hobbies and practices. For example, Arhan's father has converted one of the bedrooms into a recording studio for music. What started as a passion project recorded on a phone morphed into a new use of existing space. This drawing maps the different stages of the transformation of the room with the new hobbies and additions.
This diagram combines the aspects of the previous ones. The activated spaces are enhanced by the movement and robustness of the main actors of the narrative. Some of the spaces get blurred and smudged due to new usage and involvement of digital technologies.
The next narrative is that of the house of my grandfather, who is a partly blind person. His everyday is lived through memories and sense of touch, hearing, and smell. He moves around the house, feeling the walls, the frames of the doors, the tiles on the floor, etc. He spends the day listening to religious discourses and audiobooks. His caretakers aid him with different technologies and also exchange stories and gossip. On some days, while trying to explore the phone, his finger slips and opens up different apps or goes to a new video or an ad or a game. He spends a while trying to explore the new slippage and understand how to go back or continue with the new change. The drawing itself maps the textures of the house and practices of each day.
This diagram identifies the activated spaces in the household through digital technologies and also traces the movement of the actor along the spaces. It also shows certain deviations from the routine and everyday activities that happen at each of the spaces. The video becomes a method to hold these movements and dynamics of the house as a different form of drawing. The thesis concludes with emphasis on three major points. Firstly, the presence of digital technologies has created new forms of movements which are emerging in many households today. Secondly, these movements and changes in the usage have caused the house to appear as cellularized units with new forms of online connections. Finally, there are emerging dynamics in the house that blur the use of space through new programs and varied uses brought forth by digital interventions. These blurs and transitions bring out new meanings for the form of the household.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. I think that it was an interesting panel. I think, although they are all speaking of the digital, but there are kind of three dimensions to what the digital is kind of trying to argue. And right from Abhilasha's work, that kind of is an interesting study and survey of social media and its influences on how we shape configurations of space and visuals, that kind of reconstitute newer experiences. And also from this to Ronak's idea of the digital as a new sense. I think that was something that kind of a new sense or a new extension of the body in the process of imagining space, and with shifts at a granular level of constituting geometry, material, and form. To Vikram's case, which is also looking at the fragmentation or the fragmented conditions that the digital kind of allows to reprogram the everyday or to create a new experience with this the fragmented parts and networks that kind of constitute our experience of the everyday. So with this, I would request the respondents to sort of come in here. Can I request Zarovar to go first?
Okay, hi. So since this is a fifth year thesis work, some of my comments will be suggestions, some of them will be to build more research depth into your work. Abhilasha, yours is an interesting project. It's something, in fact, we also teach as part of our representation studio about how architectural buildings become part of something as simple as Instagram photography. In fact, people go to the same spot in different in the same building and take that image, and then it kind of sets the image very strongly, or the building very strongly in the imagination of people. But what I wanted you to do, what will be interesting for you to look at is actually the history of architectural photography and its relationship to the architectural form itself. I mean architectural drawing, which goes back to thinking of the idea of perception in architectural drawing, and it kind of feeds the space of architectural photography. Architectural photography is a very distinct field that develops. It has a sense of rendering the I mean, of course, it has a sense of rendering the horizon. It has a sense of rendering form in a certain way. Architectural photographers, if you speak to them, and I'm not just saying about how these firms have shown their work. Their firms are actually working off an archive of architectural photography. So, okay, one of the people I think it will be interesting for you to read is Panofsky's work on perception, which is there's a I mean, a longish essay of his on the idea of perception in architecture, an architectural image, which is so strongly drawing from this set notion of the horizon point, clear lines, etc. Architectural photography basically tries to take forward what the architectural drawing or the architect has tried to do in the drawing, right? None of which is actually architecture. Okay, so you will see architectural photography. Yes, Instagram is still like when people put images, they still have human beings in it. Architectural photography is without humans because you do not want people messing with the design. It is about the architect's ego, right? It is about kitna sundar shadow pada hai, you know, itna sexy form hai. So I'm saying it in a flippant way, but I have written on this also actually. So it's about the accentuation of form. And if you see, when you move from certain particular Instagram accounts to what are professional Instagram accounts of, again, it was devoid of people. And the way trees are placed, I mean, it looks so fake to me. These architects don't care about trees and stuff. They are about form, and they are about showing form, and they are not about function or use. And architectural photography becomes your best location to unpack this. So what will be interesting for you to take, I don't know if or how, what is the form of this thing, is to take this thinking more deeply into, you know, there are people who can study architectural diagrams like Ronak has, or what is the change form of the diagrammatic in the whatever all these softwares you use. But since you're taking architectural photography as something core in the idea of representation, it will be interesting to look at what are the elements that are emphasized. Okay, so like everybody went so fast, which is fine. So you know, you will see sunlight, you will see horizon lines, you will see an external shot. There is a constant repetition. You can literally make a list of codes of architectural photography, and you will see them repeated in Instagram. You will see them in architecture books. You will see them in architecture films. Like I saw these films by Raj Reval's son. Sorry, this is on YouTube. And I was like, why are all the films looking the same? Because for me, I have lived in a building which was designed by him. And I said, there is no, so then what is the purpose of this, you know, idea of, does it actually change with Instagram? Or is it that they're using Instagram now to make one more version of what they actually like doing? Like, you know, you showed those combined image things. I don't know how they do it. I'm not very good at Instagram. But, you know, then again, it's like, and you will see elements like, you know, this internal views will be certain points of the wall and the beam and the shadow or windows, or some very highly decorative interior design space, or what is it called? Those walls where you color the walls. What are they called? When you color one wall with one color and the other color. So, you know, so it's always, and that coloring the wall photos are also about showing form. Right. So, what I would want you to think of more is these ideas in your work, and I think you're onto something interesting with the realm of.
But she is the perfect person for this.
Anuj,
Your mic is on.
No, I was not talking to you.
Are you saying bad things about me? Okay.
Yeah, of course.
It's the mediatized spaces seminar.
So okay. So yeah, and then I would want you to also, what will be actually interesting, this last point to you, Abhilasha, is to see how people either get influenced by the architectural photographic form in Instagram to take pictures of their own house, or like, I need a book rack. I've done Zoom for 2 years. I need a book rack at the back. I just don't look like a good intellectual man. So this whole book rack game that happened with Zoom talks, I was like, wow, yeah, kahan se la rahe hain? I mean, I have a book rack, but it's on the side and there's a door behind me. It doesn't work.
You also need a corner angle.
यार तुम लोग ना छोड़ दो, अभी बहुत लेट हो गया, खत्म हो रहा है Zoom hopefully. So नहीं, I tried once. I had to give a talk. I put my chair in front of a book rack just to give that talk. But no, what I want to say is that how does this form of the image, the influence people, right? Because people take certain kinds of shots of their house and put it on Insta. They also go into the shadow light form play game, which is happening. Does it influence it? Does it not? You can, that range when you open out will be very interesting, because there will be some things which are very banal and some things which are very imitative of this. Okay. And that I think will be very interesting for your work. Okay. Should I have to speak on all three at the same time? Okay.
Yeah.
Ronak. Okay, Ronak. Very interesting. Oh my God. Very, very interesting for me. I wish you had been slower, because you went in a Zoom zone. Like it was like a video game that I was traversing through. But what I found interesting was your you started, this isomorphic design, form, experience, design. So there is a essay which I teach sometimes. It is called this. It's by Foucault, called "This is not a pipe, but this is an image of a pipe." C'est la pipe. It's comes from semiotics, and that is so all the and I basically try and tell architecture students that the building of a drawing is not a building, right? Or the CAD drawing that you have made, or whatever, isomorphic, this, that, the other, has not made. What I found very interesting in your thing was the transformation from Euclidean to the sphere games, but that is also limited. But what I felt which would have been interesting to do is to track a analog building, sorry for this term, through the forms that it has been rendered in. And does the form always get rendered? Is it even possible? Like, I feel that a lot of and this is also my reading of someone like Richard Sennett's work, where you make these extremely sexy designs which are supposed to be experiential. But the thing is, your presentation was also like that. It was experiential in the digital, when you were showing those shots of us entering those things. Can it actually be rendered in material form? And Sennett is talking about how architects used to design maybe 50 years ago, where they would go and sketch at a location, to sending these prefab drawings, these very jazzy drawings, which feel like you're going through some other world, And now, whether it is the central vista or anything else, everything is getting made in these very nice digital format drawings. But is this A, ever going to be the real? B, does it have any relationship with materialities? Like, how do you actually build all this? Like, who builds all this? I mean, I'm sure in Dubai, they will like kill 100 gazillion of what, this is on YouTube. No, okay. So, this is an example I always tell architecture students about what happened with Zaha Hadid's thing in Abu Dhabi, the stadium. So she had a very similar design like this, and there was a time where when it was to be rendered, about 400 workers died at one particular point because it was a very sharp curve. Okay. And she said, it has nothing to do with me. It's to do with the government. Okay. So, and that would not have happened if she had actually made the drawing with a different, I think this is to do with, so your softwares are not apolitical. They are not devoid of materialities and those who make these things. So to make that very, you were showing that cave-like thing. I'm sure they've been built in different parts of the world somewhere. They've been rendered, right? But how have they been rendered, and who has rendered them? Who has built them? What are the tools that have been used to build them? Because building design will never. I don't know if you will always have just machines which will make these prefabricated structures and put them together. Which will. So just to think of those things in your drawing idea would actually add to them, and to track it through a building which has been built, is what I'm saying. Go backwards or go forwards to its rendering, form, experience, and design. I think what happens is that in a lot of your what you were showing, the experience of the design and the experience of the form is what it is. That's all there is to it. वो बहुत सेक्सी लगता है, स्पेशली बाहर के लोगों को तो और भी ज्यादा जो नॉन आर्किटेक्चर के होते हैं, बिकॉज इट एंड दैट एक्सपीरियंस has become a part of how architecture wants to represent itself. So the digital, the way presentations have changed, when you pitch a building, when you make them in a certain way, that itself. So I'm saying that your presentation, it was great, but it was actually what you were also trying to look at as a way of designing, because it was using that same movement and experiential kind of idea of when you look at a screen. But is that, again, the question is this a building? And the last presentation, so your presentation was very interesting for me because I'm very old school and I'm still thinking of cyborgs. So, which is Donna Haraway. What was interesting was that you made these visuals from the top. And then ये सब पोजिशनिंग जो होती है आर्किटेक्चर की, डिजिटल पोजिशनिंग की, आपको ऊपर से देखना है हर चीज, या फिर उसको वो वाला पैटर्न के थ्रू आप वो बनाते हैं मूवमेंट? I felt it was a very interesting presentation and about how these things come together in the everyday life. I feel what went missing in the image zone representation is time, or how time unfolds as part of the household. And it moved. I know there's constraints of time to do a presentation. And I think it will be interesting for you to hinge this on forms of measuring time, which you hinted on, like morning time, your mother is in the kitchen, she's got an eye on the door, but she's also got music playing. How do you represent time in this kind of a closed space zone? What are the, and how does digital change time? The presence of the digital change time, right? And it does. I'm not entirely clear on what I'm trying to make you think of, but
But I get a sense of what you're saying.
there is, I think it was very interesting, very mm, this thing of like I am still, maybe I'm very old, but like for me, I was living with my friends in Bombay who, it's like I was like, oh, I have there is no jaggery in the house, and I wanted to make something, and they said, oh, 2 minutes, we'll order it online, and I was like, what? And I said, no, I'm going to walk down to the shop and get it. And also it's changed people's personality types, right? There's some people whose first instance is to go and order things. Like, I'm like, what, man, the kadi patta is growing there, why are we ordering this, everything. And so the notion of time, movement, space, and how the digital just comes and kind of eats it up in a different way. For me, it's actually very painful to go online and order something. Like it's like a task. तो मेरे को उसमें ज़्यादा दिमाग खराब होता है, time लगता है. I'd rather just walk down the road and get these things. And I think it'll be interesting for you to think of this also, how the pandemic and all this, people start ordering everything online, and then some people don't go back to what I think is the normal. And also, children at home, you showed your cousins, what is their relationship to, now to the outside world, because they've got so used to jumping on the bed and figuring out stuff at home. And yeah, I think this time thing will be interesting for you to see how the digital fits itself in, because you did it spatially. So yeah, I think that's about it. Thanks.
Thanks, Zaro, thanks. Vishwanath, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So, okay, I'll also start with individual comments for all three. So, Abhilasha, so my first point is actually picking up on what Sarovar had said about photography. I think apart from Panofsky, I think you should also read Beatrice Colomina's Privacy and Publicity, because she makes an interesting argument. She says that, I mean, she studies Adolf Loos and Corbusier, and she argues that architecture becomes modern only when it engages with mass media. And she says that in doing so, it radically sort of changes our sense of space and subjectivity. So my question to you, specifically based on that book, is that if mass media already does that, photography already does that, and it's very interesting. I mean, she shows examples of how Mies photo montage the outside views of some of his buildings almost 100 years back now. If that was already happening, and therefore people were already talking about architecture as a set of finely curated views or vistas, how is Instagram or digital media making it different? What is the difference between how Instagram looks at photography as compared to analog photography? And I think there are differences, and maybe if you focus on that, it will be very useful. I mean, I really enjoyed your topic, and I felt that if you would clarify a few things for yourself, it would help you a lot. So I think you should clarify whether you're primarily studying how Instagram has modified the way people experience space in already existing buildings. So maybe the building was designed 50 years back, but because of Instagram, the way people are photographing it and therefore experiencing it has changed. That is one kind of study. Or are you interested in asking how Instagram has resulted in architects going about designing space in a very different manner? That because now people are aware that uh, uh, building experiences are primarily consumed online and not in the real world, therefore I should design it differently. So Is this a critique on how architects design and how that design process will transform? Or is it, do you want to focus on the kind of spaces that are getting designed, not the processes by which they are designing or the methods by which architects are designing, but the type of spaces that they're designing? I saw in your presentation that you have touched a little bit on all three. And I feel that since you have done a bit of all three, even if you could try and segregate each of these three and start asking the question differently for each one, a lot of interesting things will come up. Uh, and I was also, so it was very interesting that after you showed us all these sort of Instagram images, when we went to Vikram, Ronak, I'll come back to you. We went to Vikram's presentation and all the photographs were completely non-Instagram friendly. I mean, there was, it was a messy house. I don't know whether it has something to do with architecture students, but it was fascinating. And Vikram, in your study, I could sense, I mean, it was very fascinating. I sensed a struggle at one place, and I think that's the most critical point of your thesis is, on one hand, you are trying to study space, the real physical space, and on the other hand, you are studying the digital world and the virtual space, and somewhere you are trying to overlay the digital on the physical, right? And I think when we try to overlay the digital on the physical, our default or what comes naturally to us is only to study what are the physical spaces in which people access the digital. Where do I physically sit in order to look at my phone or look at the computer? I think that is only one kind of overlay. So I would urge you to think of, if I have to overlay the digital on the physical, apart from the physical spaces in which the digital world is consumed, what are the other ways in which you could probably overlay the digital on the physical? What are the other uh, uh, relationships that you can identify? So which would necessarily mean that you're not talking of where the TV is, or where I sit with the phone, or where the laptop is placed. There were some parts of it where you, I think you were beginning to ask that question. So when you're talking of the kitchen, for example, when you're saying that, okay, now I don't go and shop, but I do it online, right? So if you could extend that and therefore start asking the question, okay, then what is a kitchen? Which you had posed, which I think you had briefly mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, but I think that can be really pushed forward. So are you saying that the kitchen, which earlier, before the internet, probably was one of the few spaces of production in houses, is also slowly becoming a place of consumption, because everything is coming from outside? Maybe even pre-cooked food is coming from outside, or cooked food is coming from outside. But I think you have a lot of data. I mean, the case you presented, I'm quite intrigued by it, especially the one where you're talking of, there's this huge family which is occupying this whole building, right? It seems to be a very interesting case in itself. But for me, the key point for you is, what are the different ways in which one can overlay the digital on the physical, and therefore what new knowledge can I generate from it? Yeah. Ronak, I really like the fact that right at the beginning of your presentation, you wanted to clarify what exactly you mean by digital. Yeah, because I think when we talk of digital, it is lumped as one singular thing, and usually seen in opposition to the physical or the real. Um, so, so to begin with, you said that to me, digital is more about the idea of numbers, right? It's not so much computers, but it is numbers. I think that is one way of looking at it. But I do feel that in your study, so either you have tried to give an overview of what are the different ways in which we look at digital, because on one hand you're talking of digital being numbers, but then you're also briefly mentioning something like artificial intelligence. You're also talking of parametricism. Okay. You're also somewhere talking of low computing power versus high computing power. So my suggestion is to make this study sharper. You start looking at analog examples, non-digital examples. For each of the examples that you have given, you start looking at non-digital examples which come close. So for example, when say you're talking of the spline or non-orthogonal, non-rectilinear geometry, it might be interesting to take someone like Gaudi as a case study and ask, okay, when Gaudi looks at the idea of the non-orthogonal or non-rectilinear, because he is not doing it using digital technology, is there something inherently different between what he does and what the others are doing? Or for that matter, when you say, if you are saying that it is about parametricism, okay, so using software for parametricism is a relatively new phenomena, but parametricism itself is quite an old phenomena, right? I mean, where people say that it's not about form generation, it is about parameters which result in a certain form. Yeah, so the design is explained as a set of parameters rather than as a set of shapes. Yeah, so if you could pick up certain parametric examples of architecture which are pre-digital era, again, I think it will be a very useful thing. The other thing which you mentioned is artificial intelligence and space making, right? The idea of artificial intelligence. So I think there also one needs to clarify, okay, what are the different ways in which you can talk of artificial intelligence in relation to architecture? So are you talking of the use of artificial intelligence as a design tool for architects, or are you looking at the impact of artificial intelligence on the type of spaces or the type of architecture that will be designed in the future, or the type of buildings that will be designed in the future? So because artificial intelligence as a design tool is a very different discussion altogether, and the impact of artificial intelligence on building types or urban form or the idea of cities would be a different discussion. So especially for your next semester, maybe it might be useful to clarify which one you want to take forward.
I would.
Yeah. Are you done with the comments, Vishwanath? Can we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Any one of you guys want to respond to or take the conversation further? Yeah. Yeah.
So while looking at the accounts and practices that I was studying, I also realized how, as Sarovar said, how architectural photography becomes very important. The framing becomes important. And while studying the projects, I also realized that even if the source of light is not in that direction, we see photographs that are composed in a way that you see the horizontal rays in certain pattern, and certain specific pattern is followed in even composing those images. We can also see when I was talking to architects about these composition of images, I also understood how they hire interior stylists to compose this perfect frame and then generate. So how social media helps in this case is it increases the speed of this faster circulation of images. There is constant circulation through architectural photographers accounts, through the practices itself account, and also there are certain trends set by people on social media with background, and which then becomes common for people to follow further. So in that sense, photography and social media is linked.
Just one thing, if I could sort of raise a counterpoint, I would say that before the prevalence of this Instagram, architects were able to, like Sarovar was explaining, hire photographers and curate the image of the building that would come out in public domain. Wouldn't you say that Instagram has sort of flattened it? Because, for example, a new building, rainwater was leaking inside a new building, and the architect would never show that photograph, but it became viral on Instagram.
Yeah.
So what it does is it gives anyone the power to photograph a building in any which way they want and open it up for public consumption. And therefore, I would argue that the hegemony of the architect in being able to curate what spaces of the building you see and what spaces you don't see could also be something that Instagram is doing. Also, in a perverse way, I think that when some things become viral and therefore popular, irrespective of what the space might look like or feel like, I think just because it becomes viral, it becomes more acceptable, right? Or then maybe the architect also shares it because everyone is sharing it. So then the discussion shifts from a discussion of space to a discussion of how viral it is, which I think is another dimension. So I think if you just ask yourself the question, how this was being done before Instagram, the same thing, like you're saying, curating light kahan se aa raha hai, etc. And what is happening now, it will be fascinating. I think it's a fascinating topic.
No, so one more thing I want to add with respect to what Vishwanath was saying. So, there's something, I don't know if it's always happened, but if you see now when big buildings are being built, they put that parda on it, the green cloth, which is not, pehle khul ke banate the, ab wo khul ke nahi banate hain. It's like they don't want you to see the process. And one of the other things that has happened in architecture world is no photography allowed ka board. And you go to, I mean, for me, Central Vista is the best example, because you don't want to show, either you want them to see the image which is circulating of the final plan, which is the digitized image on the net. You don't want to show anybody the processes of the making. So it looks like it's just emerged out of nowhere. So there is an anxiety of images that has come into architectural form, because you don't want, and it is, you will see there's no photography allowed board is there in private buildings ke bahar jab ban rahi hoti, construction sites, to government stuff. And I feel that is something that anxiety is also coming from the fact that what he was saying, that they don't want to show ki isme pani abhi beh raha hai ya pipe abhi exposed hai ya kuch. They want to show you this final jazzy form. तो वो भी interesting होगा to see, just notice, and there is a very strong relationship between photography and architecture. And what are the places where there's no photography sign comes up? I mean, Bombay is the best place to study this. Har jagah, like you go to Bhindi Bazaar, they don't like it. The Bora plan does not like people taking images. In fact, they have people who come and tell you that don't take photos, क्योंकि वो उसमें क्या छुपा रहे हो, ये भी सोचना है कि क्या इतना क्यों टेंशन हो रहा है सबको, right? So yeah.
I just want to add to what Vishwanath was saying a little earlier, and also just came up right now with Abhilasha, is the modified experience that the format of Instagram sort of brings in. Like you visit a structure which is already there for some years, and then the layer of Instagram through a certain algorithm, which kind of comes back to you in different ways. And that looping, because it's something that is fed by us, it kind of goes through a set of algorithms, and it kind of comes back to reshape our own experience of that space. And I think that's something which is interesting because it's almost flat in the sense there's no sense of what is viral, what is trending, and what's not. Because in that sense, it becomes flat with a new, say, a new design or a new trend which is coming up, and then kind of it's overlaid with those other buildings, and the algorithm sort of takes that call to what is trending at that particular moment. So I think that might be an interesting sort of exchange which is happening, which we don't have a control of. And partly I think what Ronak was trying to bring in with AI was it's a formal question with AI, and I think this is another. So this is a question with the images, how the images sort of come back to us. So I mean, I'm just trying to trace and maybe correlate the way in which both of these sort of play. I mean, and then there is a question again on the form and the image, kind of what builds that in the digital space on a screen, I mean, not reducing it only to the question of screen, but because it's all imaginary, it's all kind of happening in a space which is calculating, which is kind of processing so much. To us, it is kind of the perception of that is kind of a finished image. It's kind of, we are consuming that kind of a content. So I'm just trying to bring that into the discussion here.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to add on Abhilasha's point and try to connect it to mine. So, I mean, what she was clearly also trying to establish was the fact that the way that buildings are made today are changing completely because, like there is a shift towards a form of catalog making. And this catalog is again something that we get from the individual people themselves who give us catalogs of images that they source from Instagram, Facebook, Arch Daily, etc., etc. And they go to the architect and they say, okay, this is what I want, this is what it is. And they show a picture of 10 different images, 10 different things, and they're eventually collaged into a house together. And the building is made in that way, the designing of form and space gets shifted through that image. But also at that point, the realization is that those images are of a specific moment, like she was saying, it's of a specific sunset, it's of a specific moment in time where they're capturing a certain experience that's probably coincidental or something like that. And that is where I want to talk about Sarovar's point of time. Like, what is it that how do you look at capturing time through the digital? And if that's the most important part of experiencing space through time, then how do we go about it? Because I mean, I now that Sarovar mentioned it, like I'm starting to think about it. What are the different ways that time has influenced the way that I looked at space? And again, like Vishwanath said, that the actual way that people live that space is messier. It's different. It's completely different to that single image that is there on social media. And hence, what is making a space that is influenced by that single image, change with respect to how it's actually inhabited later.
Also, something very interesting that Vikram's point has triggered in my head is that how did people function? And this connects to something one has tried to do earlier. How did people connect to buildings before the image? Like, there is a thing कि बिल्कुल ताजमहल जैसा बना के देंगे घर तुम्हें. Or so there are these like even when I worked on Bindi Bazaar in Dongri, there were buildings which would have like Greek pillars, Kathiawar. It was a combination of the imaginations of what the traders had seen across the world, mixed with what was available in materials and skills. Okay. And also this notion, when we were working in Govandi once, and there was this contractor who said ki this lady has given me her life savings, and she said mere liye Taj Mahal jaisa ghar bana de. So full marble inside, tiles outside, everything, so she was a vegetable vendor who had saved up money, about 3 lakh rupees, and this is there on the Herbs website, also some of this work. So her thing was ki mere ko bahut chamakta hua ghar chahiye, like, so she was playing with the idea of her image without an image also. And I think that's also an interesting kind of segue into this. Also, well, as you know, recently a man literally built a Taj Mahal house for his wife. I don't know if you guys saw that. It's like, so the house looks like the Taj Mahal, and it's got a dining table inside. And so, but this thing, no, this Taj Mahal jaisa ghar is a image in the head of people कि, chamakta ho, sundar ho, sab dekhne aaye. It's an image which has evoked a lot of architectural aspiration. या फिर this notion that I hear is बिल्कुल दुबई जैसा लगेगा, भिंडी बाजार दुबई लगेगा, या so these are all also kind of different realm of the imagery of architectural forms and built environments.
I'll take it ahead. Yeah. So I mean, I like that. I think Sarovar and Kashi has both mentioned to look at the analog way of building or taking that comparison lens. And one, like Sarovar mentioned it through its ability to being rendered into the materials and the physical form, and Kashi were hinting at going back to numbers. Now, I think like Gaudi did come up in our discussions earlier, and for me, Gaudi is as digital as any person currently who's working with a computer, because the way he was designing, and I mean, you can call them as proto-digital, pseudo-digital architects who had been engaging with that method of thinking through algorithms and numbers, was using almost gravity as that parameter in that entire process of designing the Sagrada Familia. So, I mean, for me, Gaudi was a digital architect way ahead of his time. And for computing power is why I made that, why it comes as a parameter or in the narration is because when so I felt like I think that three things were digitized over the course of time. First, we were able to digitize our world, where we made sort of physics and maths comes up. We are now trying to resolve our surrounding into equations. The second thing was when we were able to make our culture, the image and the language into digital, and both had combined to make the electronics of the contemporary. And when we see spline had shifted the way we were drawing, and that was a jump in mathematics. But to subsurface division and then the cellular automata, the maths hasn't really shifted, but the jump in computer power has been so immense that it was able to change the way we were thinking or designing. And which is why the computing power or even that jump in that comes, I felt what becomes something important. As far as AI is concerned, I was looking at it, how it affects the designing of the type. And in terms of the rendering, how does it render? So all the 5 case studies that I had done for the thesis have been built in the physical world. And I had a difficult time because I agree a lot of these designs we see, and many of them do not get rendered in real or physical. And most, it can be a like you are not able, you don't know how to make it, or that challenge is so huge you might skip that part. But I for the 5 study structures which I was looking at, I did. And in terms of this thinking, it was the first time I think that Dushyant has written this in his essay as well, which I was referring to in first questions, where in terms of drawing, architects for a long time were making the surface of the structure, and it was through this digital which gave us that almost a parameter or that ability to then incorporate material and that volume collectively, and it has an effect on both in terms of crafting and this. And I was aware of this crafting dimension long before when it started, but it was a conscious choice to not tackle everything at once. So yeah.
Yes, Prasad.
I was thinking of like the the analogous form, like there is a I'm suggesting to 3 of you all to think about computational speed. Now computational speed has kind of increased over time, and it is the computational expansion, computational speed which has increased. like last 200 years, you see the computational speed which is external to human body is kind of, you increase it. And the computational speed increasing produced first, the frame, the architectural grid, the frame, which kind of, which people try to kind of reappropriate, the computational, and then it produced what we are currently, what Ronak, you showed as subsequent, Now, the computational speed appears to be not overlapping very well with the speed of the senses. They appear to be kind of disjointed in a sense that this, the way you calculate and the way the computer we calculate and compute in different logics which are not necessarily the computational logic, which is multiple but still linear. I mean, of course there are probabilities, but there are still linear. But we compute probably a little bit slowly, but in oblique ways, and that's why that's how the slippages of Vikram was very interesting, because those slippages were happening because the two speeds were different. The two speeds were kind of the speed of the senses and the speed of the external device. They're two different speeds. I'm not saying one is faster than the other. It's a different logic that is set. Now, if you were to historicize it, you see that as the computational speed increased, there is a detachment from the senses, from the visceral sense. There is increasingly that detachment, and in that detachment, the principles and values that we held, which was to make community, intimacy, solidarity, network, family, all those things, sitting across the dining table and chatting. So all of those values and principles kind of sit very awkwardly with the computational speed, with the logics of the computational speed. Now, I was thinking that in the like for both of, or for all three of you, actually, the interesting step would be to speculate on that when the computational speed kind of really takes off in another into another dimension altogether. It's a completely because it's not a question of digital. It's a question of the speed at which computation can happen with respect to producing a form, actually. So that speed and those logics. So what would be the kind of, like to speculate on life, the moment it kind of, these computational speeds kind of really like how do we kind of start eating, like Vikram was already suggesting, that the eating and dining table, all of this is getting reconfigured. All of this was getting reconfigured. Is that how do you kind of see this computational speed kind of and the awkwardities that it has with the sensible speed, like sensible in the sense human sense related speed, the sense speed. Like we see things with a certain slowness, the camera sees it a little bit faster, but we see it differently. Camera sees it differently, and the computer probably sees it very differently and different speed altogether. So it's like a three. And when we kind of borrow logic from one and the second to kind of produce our habitation, then there is a detachment that happens, and therefore the modernist critique of buildings is that they produce repetitive standard forms which are delinked. So probably that is happening because of speed. So how do you see that digitally produced speed kind of, impacting will we be detached further, completely detached? I mean, it will become a completely asensible thing. In that sense, is it nonsense? In a non-sensible way, nonsensical. Vikram also this one.
Yeah, I was going to say that what you are saying has a very direct relation to, I want to say, generations. Like with every generation, there is a certain association of these two speeds that you're saying, so a particular generation has a speed level with that generation of computation. And then as that generation increases, then the computation is still intact, but then the sense of our speed starts changing. So at every different point in time, regardless of what space it is, I feel there will be some constant balance happening between different sets of people. It might be like the space changes, we might change, but there is always some balance happening with a different set of people within the same space.
So
Because we think of space also in that way, right? Like an example of houses and households is, you build for yourself and you envision your successors, kin, whoever it is, would stay in the same household and then gets passed on, etc., etc. But if you look at it in the terms of balance and speed, and you say it's only for that generation that this balance is maintained, and the new generation looks at a new balance. So then that notion, like that space then becomes isolated to that generation, and a new form of space starts coming in for the new generation.
One
Also,
very
go ahead, Ronak.
One very clear example of this reminds me of what happened in our last elective, which was based on generative drawing. And so Karthik was taking this elective and he showed us how, like in one of the part of the script, it was a 10 by 10 grid and the computer made 100 squares. And Anuj just randomly asked that, why do we not just pick the lines? It looks the same. And this is one of the part where for me, this difference in speed becomes very evident. And I also say this in that video, that computational logic does not have a sense of intuition, despite its speed. And it will just repeat that one command for how many ever times it can in that speed. And it is for this, when we get this agency of us, and despite that entire hunt for speed, it still lacks intuition in some sense.
Also, just to continue, I will come to you, Anuj, sorry, just to continue this point on it. There is also a difference of, in this speed, in all of these, like when you say the sensory speed and the computational speed, the base data for both of them is quite different.
Yeah.
But for it to be experienced, now bringing in Vikram, to experience that, there is the computation has to produce something perceivable, and in that, I think it kind of somewhere loses that speed. Okay, I don't want to literally sound like losing the speed in that sense, but so that's what. And okay, let's come to Anuj and also then Vishwanath.
Vishwanath was raising. Acha, Anuj.
Yeah.
I mean, Vishwanath, you can go first. No, I'm glad that Ronak brought Karthik, because I was also thinking of that discussion. And in fact, he said a very interesting thing that, and this is to kind of respond to also the point that Prasad was raising, that it's not that it's just speed, because human mind is doing many, many more things at the same time, which we probably are unaware of. And hence we slow down. So that was a very interesting point that and that became a very I have a very interesting example that when I came back from the US to back to Mumbai, it became so difficult for me to cross the road because everything on the road was kind of moving simultaneously, But in the US, you first press the button, then the car will stop, then you will see in one side, then you will go again, then you will see the other side, then you'll go further again. So that is kind of linear kind of process which these like totalized modern cities are approaching towards. Whereas here you are, there's a dog passing by, there is a cycle wala, there is a thing, and you control your speed according to saving yourself of so many different speeds. And I find it so profound, this whole act of crossing the road in a city like Bombay, that I'm always thinking of, how does the mind do that. The second is overall, like in this panel, I've been thinking that, that have we kind of shifted into discussing the sociality of images and the sociality of circulation of images to the sociality of digital space. I mean, because where do we locate it? And I was just reading this one very interesting conversation where this person was raising this point, that how is it that that digital has kind of been obsessed and stuck in the visual, but the digital pure, like, clearly was not a space which was meant to just kind of engage with the visual. So it can do much more. So that is one obsession uh, that we need to kind of critically look at in the frame of discussing architecture. And second is, I was just thinking that if it is then about circulation of images, then how does circulation of images influence our social spatial existence? Which means that how does it change the relationship between people? How does it bring together people in space? So and subsequently, what are the semantic shifts it brings? What are the new associations that get associated with living, and therefore what kind of social discourse it produces, therefore what kind of aspirations it produces, and therefore how does it manifest in space. So I thought it was a very intermingled kind of panel, which probably will benefit if we are able to locate the direction for each of these. Otherwise it gets confusing. Yeah.
Thanks, Anuj. Vishwanath, we can close from your comment.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'll be quick. So, in fact, interestingly, Anuj, I was also going to touch upon the same 2 points, but slightly differently. To me, while talking of artificial intelligence or big data, etc., to me the key difference is that even after increasing computing power, even after discussions of big data and parametricism, till that point, when we talk of the digital world, we are primarily talking of garbage in, garbage out. That the human being is giving the algorithm or the parameter to the computer, and so if that is garbage, it comes out. Whereas human beings can be garbage in, knowledge out, or knowledge in, garbage out, right? That is what makes the brain interesting, that it can take garbage in and produce knowledge out of it. To me, that is where machine learning is a big jump, because when we talk of machine learning in computing, we are saying that the machine will make mistakes. The machine will take all data in and randomly, not randomly, but it will come out with solutions. So if you look at, for example, how IBM's first generation Watson software for law, it just gobbled in all the court cases, all the law cases, and based on that, it started giving suggestions on how to fight or what would be the probable result of a case. But now what is happening is they are feeding in all the arguments made by lawyers in different court cases. So in the second generation, which will be the machine learning generation of the app, actually we don't know what the computer is doing. It is becoming like the brain. And to me, we need to discuss the impact of the first generation use of the digital on architecture differently from the second generation. And when it comes to the second point about, the image, Instagram image, and I think both Vikram's and Abhilasha's thesis, I think one thing we should also separate when we are talking of this idea of the image. I think we should separate the Instagram reel or YouTube shorts or TikTok videos from the still image, because the discussion of the still image is closer to what Beatrice Colomina talks about, in that it can be highly curated. It's a single vantage point. But the moment I take a camera and move around in a space, I think the discussion changes. It is still curated based on who took the video and how they walked, but for the first time, instead of just seeing individual snapshots, we are seeing space in time, a 3-second clip or a 30-second clip, which I think makes us imagine space in a very different way. So I think that, so if we make these two distinctions regarding the digital world, I think there could be really interesting discussions.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
I have one
Yeah,
last.
yeah, Zarova. Yeah.
Sorry. No, I have something to say to Anuj, but there's a thing that Anuj was saying, that you are negotiating so many things, the cycle and the dog. They are also negotiating you, Anuj. And the poem that comes to my head is Kabira Khada Bazaar mein mange sabki khair, na kisi se dosti, na kisi se bair. So वो हमारी ontology कहाँ पे located है और बाकी सब हमारे आसपास हैं, वो भी यही कर रहे हैं. So, okay, sorry.
So Sarovar, you just qualified the computer as being now,
No.
as one of us. So yeah, I think. Yeah, Prasad, you wanted to say something?
No. I said Sarovar got in Kabir and Bazaar into the digital, which was quite a feat actually. No, but I am not like I have not been kind of no, I'm not calling computer numb, or I think it's at a proto stage. It kind of it will have its own life. I think recalibration of sensibility is what Vikram was saying, to kind of get into some equilibrium, get into something that will happen. That will also happen. But I think it requires serious work to kind of think from the terms of the computer, actually, from the terms of the digital life. So I think that's something which will be interesting. And good.
I think this is also a topic. Yeah, even quantum computing. So I think this is also a topic which is never ending. It kind of can keep, and I think everybody is equally fascinated across decades. And it's not just now. I think the moment computer has come, people are speaking about all of these aspects. So I think we will have many sessions on this. We intend to. So we'll end the session now today for this one. The next panel is titled Difference in Urban Spaces. It'll be at 4:15. So let's join back at that time. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.